Welcome to another edition of Toddster's Magical Mystery Review. I'm your host Toddster, and today we're going to take a look at this wonderful collection here called Past Masters by the Beatles. Yes, came out originally March 7th, 1988 on Apple. And yeah, so let me see. So 1987 was pretty much sort of a big year for them. Their back catalog was finally issued on compact disc, the British catalog. So when it came to putting these out as on compact disc, the question was, what about all those other songs that weren't on the albums? You know, would they put them out as bonus tracks on the albums, or make a little compilation of all it? But the answer came for the latter part, and Mark Lewison, one of probably the biggest Beatle experts, you know, he made this collection, and actually came out originally as 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2. You know, Volume 1 almost looks like this, and then Volume 2 has the colors inverse, you know, the white background and the black font. But yeah, and it has it's a pretty great collection, you know. It has some of their greatest songs are in this collection. But yeah, let's get into the songs. So we start off with the single version of Love Me Do. It's the Ringo version with Ringo on drums, which came out as a single, their first single, October 1962. And yeah, as I said back in the Please Please Me review, which was like, oh god, seems like a longer time ago when I made that. Yeah, and Paul's voice is pretty nervous. I mean, you could hear it on the on this version, but other than that, it's a pretty good version. But I do prefer the album version, the Andy White version. And then we go into the third single, For Me to You. Came out April '63 and was their second #1 hit, or first #1 hit, depending on what you believe in. But I say it's their second #1. Yeah, and Paul sort of remembers, when he recalls this song, he sort of remembers hitting a minor chord by accident, and which sort of was like which turned out to be a big step into John and Paul's songwriting. You know, the minor chord, and when it goes into the little middle 8, you know, I got arms that long to hold you, that bit. And yeah, and it's a great song, but yet I do prefer the mono version of it, where it has more harmonica on it. And this one here has the stereo version. Well, most of it is all stereo, where the beginning lacks the harmonica. And yeah, that's very interesting how they edit it, you know. The little da-da-das and the harmonicas, they're all done in separate takes, but yet mixed together. Yet it was only a 2-track, and yet, you know, somehow they managed to put it all in with, you know, in such a primitive in the primitive way that they made it. And then we go into the B side of For Me to You, Thank You Girl, which is sort of like one of those love letters to their fans. You know, thank you for buying this record. Yeah, it's a pretty good song, but yeah, you know, as much as I prefer the mono For Me to You, I still prefer this on stereo. You know, where it has more harmonica. But then then we move on to the next single, She Loves You. Yes, came out in August '63, and it's the one that sparked Beatlemania in England and in Europe. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, when you hear stories about how this came about, you know, and all these people were sort of turned off by this song at first. Paul used to tell the story of when he and John played it to Paul's dad. He's sort of like, can you just change those yeah yeah yeahs to yes yes yes? You know, it's too Americanized and all that. And then George Martin does recall, you know, when George sings the little sixth note that ends the song, you know, yeah 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 yeah. He was sort of like, you know, it sounds a bit corny, but the other guys were saying, no, it's great, love it, you know, and all that. But yeah, it's oh god, what's to say? It's definitely one of the best songs ever. You know, definitely in my top 10 favorite Beatles songs of all time. And yet I do have a pretty interesting story. My brother and I, Christopher, we sort of have a little band together called the Two Costa Ricans. And one day, if anyone knows about Beatle tribute bands, may know the name of Tony Kishman, who's one of the best Paul McCartney lookalike performers around, and is actually from Tucson as well. And one day we were up on stage, and Tony was came by in one of these open mic sessions, and he was like, "Can I join you up on stage? Play a couple of tunes?" And one of the songs that we did was She Loves You. And I gotta tell you, it's something happened, some strange thing happened while we were all playing that song. I think my brother and I, our inner Beatles sort of came out while we were playing it. I mean, I could see my brother playing guitar, all of a sudden his legs are starting to move a bit, you know, like John used to do. And I'm on the drums, all of a sudden my head is starting to bop about like Ringo, and you know, and all that. And it was great. It was absolutely great. We never played it before. We never played before, but yet something happened that was, oh god, some magic happened at that night. But yeah, so that's She Loves You, and then the B-side, I'll Get You. I wasn't very fond of this song at first. You know, I thought, it's okay. But then when I first saw Paul in concert, he did this song, and since then I began to appreciate it more. It's like, yeah, that's a pretty good tune, you know, much more than I thought before. And notice it's very interesting how the lyrics. You notice that the word imagine is mentioned in the song. Imagine I'm in love with you, and I'm thinking, and I'm pretty sure John sort of like, maybe it was his idea of putting that word. It's like, you know, maybe I should use that in a song someday. But who knows? And then we go into the next single, the one that broke through in America for the guys. I Want to Hold Your Hand. Yes, came out November 1963, and it's also, yeah, it was written sort of nose to nose, as John said, and when Paul was living with his girlfriend's house. Jane Asher. Yeah, they written it in the little basement, in the basement where the piano is, where, you know, Paul was living there. And yeah, and it was also the first song recorded on 4-track tape machine. Ever since before then they were working on 2-track, and oh my god, another great song, another one of my top 10 favorites. And what I love about it is the probably the middle 8 section. And when I touch you, I feel happy. It sort of goes into this little area that's different from the verses and the chorus. And yeah, and the way that that Paul harmonizes during the second time, that brings shivers to my spine. I just God, the way that John and Paul harmonize during that in this song is it's lovely. It's one of the loveliest sounds that you would ever hear. And then we go to the B side, which is equally as great as the A side, This Boy. Yeah, and it shows a great 3-part harmony from John, Paul, and George. Sort of like, I think I heard that John, it's one of John's song. He was trying to write sort of like try to write a Smokey Robinson type ballad, which sort of, I don't know, but it sounds a bit like the Beach Boys' Surfer Girl as well. Also, pretty heavily, on 3-part harmony, 4-part harmony, all that. And yeah, but yeah, it's a lovely song, awesome song. And then we go into the German versions of a couple of their songs. Komm, gib mir deine Hand, which is the German version of I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and was actually recorded in Paris, January '64. And actually, the vocals were recorded in Paris. They used the old backing track, which they used. But yeah, how that came about was Odeon Records, which was an EMI label mostly in Europe. They sort of asked the Beatles if they could re-record some of their songs in German, but they insisted. They weren't very thrilled about the idea, but having played all that time in Hamburg and all that, they sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, and it's okay version, but yet the lyrics are not direct translations to the original lyrics, but yet it's sort of very funny to hear it in German, as the next song, Sie liebt dich, which is the German for She Loves You. And yeah, but yeah, this version is pretty interesting. It's a brand new performance altogether, since I think the original masters of She Loves You were sort of lost or deleted or something like that. Yeah, but it's very interesting to hear it. So yeah, so that's the first side of Volume 1. So we flip the record, and we go for the with the Long Tall Sally EP, which came out in June of '64, and it's basically mostly cover versions of some songs. Start off with, of course, Little Richard's Long Tall Sally, which to me is Paul's best screamer ever, caught on tape, and all done in one take with George Martin on the piano. And oh my god, and they had been playing that song for a very long time. They knew it all, back to front, and all that. And if you ever watch performances of that song, you notice that right towards the end, Ringo goes crazy on the drums. I'm still trying to figure out how he did that. You just have to watch it in slow motion and sort of learn how to use it. But yeah, it's an incredible performance. Probably one of the best covered songs that they did. And then I Call Your Name, which is an original that actually was originally given to Billy J. Kramer a year before. Yeah, and it's but yet it uses a bit of a ska beat during the guitar solo. Yeah, it's a great song, but yet it could use more cowbell. And then Slow Down, the old Larry Williams cover, which is okay, but you know, even though John stumbles a bit during when singing the second verse, I mean, you hear him well, double tracking. You hear him say two different words all at once and all that. And then Matchbox, the old Carl Perkins tune with Ringo singing. Yeah, it's another okay song. But yet I do find it very funny when it gets towards the end. You hear Ringo sing well 3 times at once. So it's not just double track Ringo, it's triple track Ringo and all that. But yeah. Yeah, and then we move on to let's see, their eighth single, I Feel Fine. This came out in November '64. John wrote this song, and yet it's sort of like inspired by an old Bobby Parker song called Watch Your Step, and the drums are very much What I Say, you know, the old Ray Charles number. But yet when they were recording this, a happy accident happened. So John was sort of put his guitar down and leaning over to the amp, and all of a sudden the A string started feeding back, you know, and they were like, "What the hell was that?" And George wanted to say, "Well, oh, that's feedback." And I said, "Oh, can we put that on the records?" And that's what you hear in the beginning, which is probably the first feedback that was ever used on a rock and roll song. Then we move on to the B-side, She's a Woman, which, if you think about it, is almost the same song as I Feel Fine, you know, especially, you know, the beginning, you know, as it's the same chords, you know, but yet it's more of like a 12-bar blues type song, which has a terrific solo from George. And then we go into Bad Boy, which is another Larry Williams cover, which was actually recorded just for the American market, and was put out in an album called Beatles 6 in June '65. Yet it didn't came out in England until 18 months later on a little compilation album, collection of Beatles oldies. I do have it somewhere in my vinyl collection, but yeah, it's an okay version. But yeah, but then we move on to the B-sides during that period. Yes It Is, which was the B-side to Ticket to Ride in April '65. Sort of a repeat of This Boy, but yet still fantastic song, lovely song. And I think I heard that John sort of was inspired by his mum. It's like I think red was his mom's favorite color, and the lyrics was like, "Please don't wear red, you know, it will remind me of my mom," and all that. And then the B-side to Help, which is I'm Down, which is sort of like Paul trying to write his own Little Richard song. Actually was recorded the same day that they recorded Yesterday and I've Just Seen a Face. So 3 completely different songs, all recorded in one day. You have a rocker, a ballad, and a folk number. But yeah, and of course, you know, John on the electric piano doing his Jerry Lee Lewis best. You know, I mean, you know, that performance at Shea Stadium is pretty, you know, it's a must to watch. You know, see him on the go crazy on the piano with, you know, playing with his elbows and all that. Yeah, and so that's the first volume. If you had it on the, if you bought it as 2 volumes, and then we go into the second volume, or and all that, and we go to the very first double A-sided single, Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out. Came out in December '65, same day that they put out Rubber Soul. And yeah, Day Tripper, awesome guitar riff, song written by John, and I think the riff was sort of like a little nod to the Stones' Satisfaction, you know, sort of like wink wink, nudge nudge. Yeah, and it could be, you know, the song could be varied. There's many different variation, how it means, you know. Maybe it means about you know, taking a day trip, you know, across the county and all that. But and it could also be about, you know, could be about drugs and all that. But yeah, I love this song. You know, another one of my top 10 favorites. Yeah, but I love the little rising tension in the middle. You know, you'd hear you know, the harmonies going where you just, you know, and then it goes in back into the riff, and it's lovely. And then We Can Work It Out, the song that was written by Paul, mainly by Paul, yet John put in the middle eight with you know, life's too short and there's no fussing and fighting, and yet George had put the idea of putting it in waltz time, 3/4 time. And yeah, so yeah, it's a great song, but yet I like it how it slightly speeds up. The tempo is speed up a bit by towards the end. Yeah, so then we go into the next single, Paperback Writer. Came out in June '66. Yeah, another song by Paul. Probably inspired by some article he read about in the Daily Mail about some inspiring author, and yet was written in a very letter form. You know, dear sir or madam, would you read my book and all that. Yeah, and it's a bit of a departure from, you know, from all the other singles that they put out. You know, it wasn't just about I love you, you love me. You know, it could be about you know, anything and all that. But yeah, and notice how Paul's bass is very dominant in the song. You know, and that John and George sing Forever Jacques in, you know, in the back. And then we go into the B side to that Paperback Writer with Rain, which is sung by John, and probably inspired by the little rainstorm that they encountered when they landed in Australia a couple years earlier. Yeah, and it's possibly the first song that used backwards sound on record, and there's some debate of who actually came up with it. You know, some say it was John, some say it was George Martin, but who knows? But all in all, it's one of their best B-sides ever. And then we sort of fast forward a bit to March of '68 with Lady Madonna, and yep, it's a big departure from all the psychedelia stuff that they put out from the previous year. You know, sort of like back to basic rock and roll type stuff. Yeah, it was sort of a mix. It's sort of a mixture of Elvis and Fats Domino, which Fats would cover the song himself. Yeah, and the song written by Paul. Yeah, and it features Ronnie Scott on saxophone. Ronnie Scott was one of the big saxophone players at that time, and yeah, and I just love the little mouth horns that they sort of mimic in the middle. Yeah, and then the B side, The Inner Light, which was written by George, and inspired by a little poem by Layout 2, something like that, and was actually recorded in Bombay, India, when during when George was making the Wonderwall soundtrack. Yeah, and it's a beautiful song, pretty much overlooked compared to it, but yeah, it's a lovely song. And then we go into the next single, Hey Jude, which is their first single on the Apple label. And of course, if you don't know how it came about, Paul wrote this for John's son Julian when John and Cynthia were going through a divorce, and Paul was sort of like help him cheer up and all that. And yeah, it's a good song, a great song, but yet one cannot help but sing along to the na 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 chorus, na 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 na. Yeah, and then we go to the B side, which is equally as great as Hey Jude, Revolution. Yeah, this was the second version that they did. Yet, yeah, I think it was George's idea. Well, they did make the an earlier version, which turned out to be Revolution 1 on the White Album. But George thought, that's a bit too slow. Can we do it a little bit faster and more raunchier? And that's how the guitars sound on this version, which was recorded directly to the mixing console to give it that distorted sound. Oh yeah, and it's a great B-side. And then we go for the we flip the record to Get Back. The single version came out in April '69, just a little more than a year than it before it came out on the before version of it came out on the Let It Be album. Yeah, and this one has a little more of the coda at the end. Get back, Loretta, your mama's waiting for you and all that. And as I said on the Let It Be review, it's one of my all-time favorites. I love how Paul mentions Tucson and all that. And then we go to the B-side, Don't Let Me Down, which is John's little love song to Yoko, and a great vocal from him as well, and it's pretty good. Then we move on to the next single, Ballad of John and Yoko, came out in May '69, and it's basically about John and Yoko getting married and having their first bed in, and this song only has John and Paul on the song in the recording. George and Ringo were off doing something else, so John did well, he sang lead, of course, and he also did all the guitars, and Paul did the bass, the drums, piano, and some percussion, and sang background and all that. But yet when it came out, it did cause a little controversy using for the Christ mention in the chorus, and but yet still it's a good song. And then we go to the B side, which is Old Brown Shoe, written by George. Yeah, it's a bit of a ska shuffle type song, which is okay, not one of the best, in my opinion, but it's all right. And then we go to the an earlier version of Across the Universe. Now this one is the Wildlife version, which came out as in a charity album that was put out in December '69, and this one has, you know, the little sound effects in the beginning, you know, the birds chirping and the wings flapping and all that, and it also features two fans singing backing vocals. I guess John and Paul, they sort of like picked out a couple of fans that were, you know, that was sort of like gathering outside Abbey Road, and cherry picked a couple of guys, and that's what you hear on this version, and it's also sped up as well, but yeah, it's a great song, it's still a great version, but yeah, I sort of prefer the LP version, you know, with the strings and all that. Then we move on to the single version of Let It Be. Now this one has a different guitar solo from George. Yet it's still a great song, you know, with any version, you know, I can go with, you know, still a great song. And then we finally end this collection with the B-side, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. Now this song was like the longest gap in their recording career. It started out, they started working on it in May '67 and wasn't finished until a couple years later when John and Paul put in their vocals. And it's a pretty funny song, you know, a bit of a goofy song, you know, sort of like, you know, goes from one bit to another, you know, and all that, you know, but and in fact John wanted it out as a Plastic Ono Band single. I think it was going to be like a follow-up to Give Peace a Chance or Cold Turkey, one of it, but the other Beatles was like, no, it's got to be a Beatles song and all that. But yeah, it's an okay song, just a little B-side, that's all. So that's the album there. So what to say? Well, it's a great collection of all the non-album tracks, and as I said, some of their best stuff in this collection, and some obscure stuff as well. As far as my rating, I'm going to give this 4 Beatles out of 5. Yes, 4 Beatles for past masters. So yeah. So, my name is Toddster, and you just watched another magical mystery review. And we'll see you next time. Until then, toodaloo.